Thank you for the introduction. I don't know if I know everything about daylight, but I can try to explore something about it. The title is Healthy Indoor Climate, Daylight, and the European Healthy Home Barometer. As you know, we do some studies about what is a healthy home. We think it's quite important, and one of the reasons for that is that we spend most of our time indoors. I don't know if you are aware that the fact that we spend 90% of our time indoors, most of these times we do it in our own homes, but we also do it at workplaces, schools, and other places. And some of these things we think is quite important. It's in an issue that we need to take into account. And we did that, and to focus on this a little bit, we did that with a campaign we started in the beginning of or middle of May this summer. And we call it the Indoor Generation, and this is a movie, so I'll step out, and you hope the sound is okay.
In 160 seconds, you will decide how this story ends. This is a story about us, the indoor generation. A generation that spends 90% of its life indoors. It all started the day we left nature behind. We filled our homes with lovely things and all the stuff we wanted. Our homes became places you would never want to leave. Artificial light replaced daylight, and we built our houses so that nothing could escape. We cooked and showered, breathed and played, slept and sweated. But we had closed ourselves in to a point where nothing could get out. So when the air turned bad inside, we tried fixing it with chemicals. And we put in little artificial suns everywhere to make the darkness bearable. That's when things started to happen. Hard to notice in the beginning. Some needed help to sleep, to breathe, to not itch. Many of us even started to feel sad. So we turned on happy lamps to make the sadness go away. Then, scientists discovered that the air inside our homes is up to 5 times more polluted than the air outside. And that the lack of daylight can affect children's learning and increase blood pressure. It turns out that kids' rooms often have the highest concentration of toxicants in the house. In fact, millions of homes are unhealthy to live in. They discovered that living in damp and moldy homes increases the risk of asthma by 40%. And I learned that millions of people like me suffer from asthma and allergies caused by a bad indoor environment. And so, here we are. How the story ends is up to you, because it's not written yet. If you care about the indoor generation, do something. Begin to think and live differently. Let light and fresh air into your life again. Even small changes can make a huge difference for coming generations. Learn how at theindoorgeneration.com.
So this created quite a lot of hype globally. Actually, the movie has been seen at this time approximately 100 million times across the world. And it's also based on some of the stories that we say that some of our products is part of the solution. We are not the complete solution, we are part of the solution. But I think if we consider that future houses, or when we do something with our homes, we need to make them healthy. We need to work together with energy efficient and healthy environment, and those two things need to go hand in hand. We can do quite a lot on energy, but we need to maintain that we are healthy in the environment we are living in. So one of the principles we work with is what we call the active house. It's a little bit challenging the passive house, but it's considering comfort, which is the indoor environment. Of course, it considers the energy consumption the house is using, and it can consider how it affects the environment. All these kind of things is, of course, necessary to consider when you build the next house. So this is the vision for what we think could be a way forward. And that's also taking into account that when we talk about a healthy environment and a healthy home, we need to consider that it is also the home, but it's also the place where you stay during daytime. So it's actually the whole 24-hour cycle. So you need to consider sleep, work, and live. It's around the clock, so it's your home. It's the way you go to the city or to the workplace, in the schools. It's also when you leave the home, or leave the workplace, go somewhere else, exercise. You do this quite a lot at home. So it starts out in the bedroom, for example, in the morning, that you need to have a dark bedroom. You need to have it ventilated quite good. You need to have places where you can be in the morning to entrain yourself to the morning light, so you are synchronized with the 24-hour cycle. You need to look into the offices or schools, because we know they have a huge impact of the environment. The indoor environment has a huge impact on how is your well-being and how positive you are and your satisfaction. And of course, you need to consider when you go back home how that is affecting you, the way you then go to sleep and have a good night's sleep, because that will also then affect you the next day. So this is a 24-hour circle. So you need to consider what's happening in the morning at your home. What can you do at the home? What can you do to work? What can you do at work, in school? What can you do in the afternoon? And so on. So it goes on and on. So this is what we set out to do. As you can know, we are having some of my colleagues have some a booth outside, but you can see this year's edition, which we call the Healthy Homes Barometer. We started out in 2015. In 2015 and 2016, we sent out the questionnaires to the 12 and 14 European countries to ask them what they think is a good indoor environment. And this year and the last year's edition, we use what we call the European Silk database. It's a survey on home and living conditions across Europe for every member state in Europe. And so it correlates the health of the people working or people living in their own homes. And this is what I would like to show you a little bit about. I'll take you slightly back to the first two, and then I'll continue to the last two. So when we ask, for example, the people in Europe, and in this survey, that's 12 to 14,000 people. We asked them, what is the most important thing you consider? And they ranked daylight and fresh air as the most or second most important if they would like to relate that to their own health. And if that's so important, and we know that we are inside our home quite a long time, we could see that most of them actually said they need to turn on the light when they are at home. They need to use the electric light. Even if there are plenty of daylight outside, they need to use the electric light at home. So we have an issue. But they were actually quite satisfied with the condition they had at home. So that's something that there is a dilemma between that they think it's too dark, they need some light at home, but they feel quite satisfied actually. So we thought of looking a little bit further. So we looked at the edition of in 2017 to show the correlation between health and the state of the building and the people living there. This year's edition, we took it a step forward to look at how important it is for the urban and the suburban and rural areas. So it's quite a connection to the previous peak. So that's where we're looking at that. So all this is, of course, available on the net. I picked out the data for Estonia, but I'll take the overall European level. So according to the European database, the description of unhealthy buildings, and this is when you ask people, if you report my health, I have a poor health. If I have a poor health, I'm more likely to, for example, be living in a house where I have challenge to keep my dwelling warm. It could be my home has damp and leaking roofs. I experience sometimes overheating problems, and I have a feeling that I lack daylight. So if you are reporting poor health, you are more likely to have a dwelling that is you're not able to keep warm. It's leaking roof, it's overheating, and lack of daylight. And you can see for the Estonian data, we can see it's slightly higher than the European, but that's very between the different countries. From country to country, it's higher and lower from countries to countries. But the average is on the top level. So in Europe, we have a challenge, and locally, in each national member state, we have a challenge that we need to look into. So one of the things that we looked at, and we looked at the difference between the single-family homes and multifamily homes. And in the single-family homes, we can see in general, they are more likely to have poor health if they have these 4 issues: damp, darkness, overheating, and cold. And that's slightly different from multifamily homes. What we call a single-family homes is a home where it can be just your own, or what we call it, row houses. But multifamily homes is where apartments. So that could be one of the reasons why it's different, because it's something like that. But you can see, overall, the Europeans and the Estonians are more or less at the same level, but you still have an issue that you need to consider. One of the challenges, and most challenging, and which is of course been coming up for some time now, is because of the economic crisis, that some people do not have the ability to keep their home warm. They need to close down several rooms, or they need to do something with their heating bills. They are not able to pay their own bills at the end. So what to do? How can we reduce our cost? And one of the things they do is actually turn off or turn down the heating. So they are living in a home that is too cold. And when you do so, you are twice as more likely to report poor health. And this is self-reporting. If you look at yourself, my health compared to my neighbor is lower than my neighbor's. So it's a self-reported, it's not measured, it's a self-reported poor health. So what can we do? We know that we have a large existing building stock. Actually 20%, or is it? Yeah. 15-16% of us live in an unhealthy building, 20% in Estonia. So what can we do with the buildings we have? Because we need to do something about it. We can, of course, renovate the buildings. So we try to reach a more energy efficient way of solving. But as one of the speakers at our conference said, that we should do something with the buildings that are unhealthy for the people living there. So the housing are getting more healthy, because it has a social impact quite a lot. So that's something to consider. We know that on European level, we have plenty of homes, 110 million single-family homes, 160,000 here. Most of them are privately owned. In majority, they are more privately owned in Central Eastern Europe than they are, for example, in the Western Europe. If you look at the age of the building stock, most of the buildings are actually from before 79. So it's a large proportion of the European buildings that are before 79, where we started out with doing something with the efficiency of our building stock. It's slightly different here, but there is still quite a large proportion of your buildings that are quite old. And maybe not energy efficient. So there are things to do in the renovation area. And we know that to overcome these barriers, most of the times we renovate 1% to 2% of the building stocks every year. We need to address this quite extensively. We need to increase that rate quite high because they are not energy efficient. So that's some of the things we need to consider on political level, of course. But there are barriers, and one of them for renovation is what we call information failures, split insensitive, high transaction cost, and capital market failures. These are from the Energy Efficient Directive from the Europe. I put in the gray boxes for myself and for you to help what is behind. The information failures is that are we aware of what to do and how to do and what to pick? Because we can see is adding a solar panel to the roof a better solution than changing the window or increasing the window or increasing the insulation? Or is it something else? Or is it a combination of these things? Because if you change the window or do the insulation, are we getting twice as good and more energy efficient building? Probably not. But we need to know these kind of things. The split incentives is actually the challenge between when you are a tenant and you are privately owned. If you privately own your building or your home, and or if you are a tenant, should you do something with the energy efficiency of the building itself? I don't know. The people who own or rent out buildings, if he or she make the buildings very energy efficient, will he lose money? Yeah, he invests quite a lot, but the tenant will pay less in heating and so on. And what is the incentive for him to do something with our buildings? So there are things to do politically. So keep this in mind when you do something. We need to do something with the stock we have, and we will of course need to focus on the buildings to come, but we also need to focus on the buildings that is already here today. One of the things, at least something, is what we call social and affordable house. We know that most of us, we spend 25% of our income in the housing we are in, and for someone they need to rent because they cannot afford these kind of things. So this is something that we need to look into, but it's very mixed picture, as you can see. If you look at the European map on the social housing across Europe, you can see the Central Eastern European countries. It's very low. Most of the Central Eastern European residents own their own building. Doesn't mean that it is energy efficient and high quality, but it means that that's how it is. And you can see a large fraction in other places in Europe where you have a larger fraction of what we call population living in rented, social, and municipal and non-profit houses. And for those people living this, the economy can be different. The initiatives can be challenging. But we need to do something about that. And we have done this in what we call a showcase. And the things we sometimes do is that we would like to demonstrate some of the intentions we think is important for the future. So we have done several demonstration projects. We call them several things, but you can see them on our website. This is focusing on what can we do with low-income social housing. So to the left, you see a picture of the house as it was in Brussels, Anderlecht. It's a row house. It's in, as I said, in Brussels. And to the right, you can see what we did and how we worked with it. One of the key issues with the case, which we call the Renovative, is that we wanted to make social housing, and the ideas and the renovation of the social housing, it should be affordable, and the solutions should be replicable. So you should be able to take a small-scale solution to a larger-scale projects. One of the things we looked in was, of course, increasing the amount of daylight and natural airflow through the buildings. We wanted to improve the building envelope, and of course, we changed the space in the roof. And the thing we do right now, we are doing monitoring. We have a family living in the house, where we have sociologists and anthropologists, and us, and also an engineering company doing measurements and interviews, qualitative interviews, and they also do time diaries to see what happened. First year's measurements, simple say that the residents state that they have a better health. They sleep better from when they refer to their previous home. And the previous home was not a perfect place to live. So they have a feeling that they sleep better. They have fewer sick days. And they have a feeling they need less medication. When we look at the indoor air quality, we can see that the air quality across, we have hybrid ventilation systems we should see. That's why we maintain a level of CO2 below 1150 in most of the rooms. And we don't have any overheating. This is actually taking measurement this summer. You know, we had across Europe quite good summer compared to some other places, some other times. We didn't have that many overheating days. The indoor temperature was usually below 26 degrees in all main rooms. So this is a kind of story we would like to see. We look at a building and we try to see, in this case, a social housing, and we try to do a demonstration, what can we do and how can we learn from this. And we use our occupants and have people living there to give us further information. And we've done this in several other buildings too, and you can find many of the information actually across our website. Anyway, going a little bit back, because I wanted also to include you something that will affect you maybe in the near future. We saw that, of course, some of us report that our homes and dwellings are too dark and that this has an effect on our health. But there is a European standard that is now coming out on the market. It's called a European Daylight Standard. It will be available. Last time I was told it was in middle of December. And how does that affect you as an architect? You know, European standards like this one is a voluntary standard. It will affect you in this way that if you have an Estonian standard for daylight and sunlight, if that is in conflict with this one, the Estonian standard will need to be withdrawn. And they have to withdraw it before June next year. Well, this European standard will have a focus on. It talks about daylight, it talks about view to the outside, it talks about sunlight provision in dwellings, hospital, and children care, and glare from windows in office-like environments. I'll focus on the daylight part, but I will happy to share more information of it later on if you need. I know that the sunlight provision in Estonia is quite strict, especially in the cities. We have some similar parameters, slightly different, so it might not be a big change. But a European standard is simply built up that you have a normative and informative text. In the normative text, we give indication of how to assess daylight in the interior space. It looks at the daylight provision in view to the outside, sunlight and glare, the four main topics. And this means for every building, so it's offices, commercial and non-commercial buildings. We have an informative annex where we give recommendations. In the Annex A, it's recommendations of the levels you should reach in your buildings. And the four below annex is then giving you direction how to support these recommendations. So what are the new things? This European standard has a title called EN 17037. This gives you a recommendation of openings in the facade. We have openings facade, sloped roof, and horizontal openings. So So, and there are slightly different way of doing calculation. But what we do in simple, we talk about that you need to fulfill a certain light level inside a space. This means that you need to have at least a minimum 300 lux in your room for a fraction of the space, for a fraction of the time of the year. You can do this by climate-based daylight modeling, which is an advanced one, or you can do it if you do daylight factor calculation. It will simply be the same as you did it before. You do the daylight factor calculation. You just need to see that half of the space should be above a certain target of a daylight factor. For Estonia, that's a daylight factor of 2.2. It simply means that, for example, for countries towards north, where the sky is very often like today, it's not so bright. We need larger windows to fulfill the required or the recommended illuminance levels. So toward north, we need larger windows. Towards south, they have a slightly less windows. Just to show you a graph how it develops for the all 33 member states of the CEN. It's just so that towards north you need higher levels, in the south you need slightly low. The minimum levels, as I said, in Estonia is 2.2, while in the south it's slightly above 1.5. So, just giving you a case how to work with it. This is looking at the target daylight factor of 2% or higher. I'm looking at the same simple shoebox case. It has a it has a window to floor ratio of 1 to 8. And if you have a window that is 1.7 times 1.7 in the center of the space, you are almost reaching the target. If you move the same window to the wall, to the side wall, you have a lower daylit area. You should be above 50%. Here you are down at half, so it's above 23. Then you can make it as a door, as the third one, which is even worse. Then you can split it, so you have dual openings from two sides, which is almost the same as the one. So you need to see that this European standard starts to give more than just giving you a ratio, window to floor ratio, or something similar to that, that doesn't give you any indication of how well a room can be. So this is a way to look at it. So you need to start planning and start designing with daylight. We did this example. It's a presentation we had a few years back, where we looked at one of the homes that we have done, as we did with Renoactive. We had a family living there. This is called Maison et Lumière. It's a little bit outside of Paris. It had a window to floor ratio 1 to 3. Quite large windows. Actually no overheating because of the cross ventilation and so on. I don't touch upon that this time. Just to give you an indication, showing that we have the daylight factor analysis across all spaces. For the kitchen, dining, and all rooms, we can see that the way we designed it, we pass for both the target and the target minimum at this time. So we pass all the way. And that's just to show you that we need to have larger windows. We need to consider the windows, how it's located. We need to be maybe not smart, but at least take it seriously. How we design our future buildings if we are going to follow this recommendation from the European standards. So that gives you an indication of what we are doing. I'll wrap it up just to give you that all these parameters that actually have a good set of conclusions. That is too much to talk today. You can find them on our .com, and it's called .com/HBD, Healthy Buildings Day. and you can download all these kind of stories. If you're interested in the PowerPoint today, I'm happy to share it with you. You can get it as a PDF. I know my colleagues, if you don't know, my colleagues will have it and they can share it with you. So this is free for you to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens, for the... Thank you, Jens, for the presentation. Well, I understood it's your first time in Estonia, so I'm afraid that it's the first and the last, because in November, no one wants to come to Estonia.
You know, you have as I said, told my colleague this morning, and she said almost the same. You know, you have a Danish poetry in he says who simply say January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 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 November. And maybe that's the feeling, but it's a beautiful day anyway, in a pleasant environment. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Any questions?
Hello, my name is Marko and I come from a small town of Rapla. So I have a question regarding ventilation. So it's very popular to install all those heat exchangers these days.
Yeah.
And well, we save energy, obviously. However, there are some studies that have shown a direct link in between asthma and those heat exchanging ventilation systems.
Okay.
Have you came across? Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It was very nice to see.
Thank you. So you see, so you say that the heat exchanger and the ventilator from that, is that due to the filtering of the system, or?
Well, I guess so, because there was some Danish studies that I came across like several years ago, and they indicated probably, yes, that there come some particles.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, that could work. I don't know this study in detail. It's actually one quite interesting study is that just came out. It's actually that if you provide enough daylight, it has in a space, it has an effect on the bacteria growth in your home. Rather new studies from the US actually showing that. So maybe you know, if you do the filtering, of course that could be part of it. But we have an increased number of people with asthma, and actually we show this in some of the previous studies, and you saw that in the indoor generation that we have a large fraction of people with asthma. I'm sure maybe doing something with your home is absolutely something to be quite important. The model home actually, the model home we have is in the French study. This is just one case where we had a lot of work with natural ventilation. That was one of the key important things, natural ventilation. So we had cross ventilation, stack ventilation, and it was quite good ventilated. And then one of the children had asthma and used quite heavily medication before he moved to the house. During his stay, he didn't need medication at all, which is a good story for a company like us. And when he moved out into his own home, he started to need medication again. So there is something we can do about it. As I said, this is part of the solution for something like that, of course. Yeah, thank you.
More questions?
Okay, thanks for your presentation. So I have a rather technical question. So I read about these optical fibers that you can actually transport out daylight into the back of the buildings.
Yeah.
So how do these calculations now take those kind of solutions into account? So can you use that as a so-called window?
Optical. There is plenty of studies looking at kind of transporting daylight from because you need that. It could be that my question back to you will be, could we actually do the building a little bit narrow so we don't need this kind of transportation, because they haven't been seen as working very well. You need to concentrate, and you need to reduce the number of reflections inside these optical systems. If the standard can work with, we don't talk about how you get the light in, if it's through the window or through an optical system. If you have an output, and you know this by, for example, by bidirectional measurements, and you have an output, you can apply that to a calculation, and then you can see if you fulfill the recommendation in the standards. So we talk about we don't consider where and how it come in, we just need to find out. But there are software that can support you on that. Yes, I think so.
I can continue from here, the first row. Thank you, first of all, for a very interesting presentation. I have a question, what to do with the people's mindset? For example, there was a well-known renovation project in Paris done by Lacaton and Vassal, where they were opening up an old high-rise apartment building as a social house, and enlarging the living space by the balconies, and the whole facade was glazed, and the result was, as I saw it with my eyes, that most of these glass, not windows, but the whole facades were covered with curtains, and even not with simply curtains, but these darkened curtains and reflective surfaces. So people don't want, if architects want to change their life quality, they close themselves inside these dark spaces.
Did you see this presentation by Anne Lacaton at the Daylight Symposium in Berlin last year?
No, unfortunately, no.
Actually, if you go on a website called the Daylight site, we arrange every second year something we call the Daylight Symposium. Next year it will be in October in Paris. Anne Lacaton, you can see the video and the presentation by Anne Lacaton. And actually 4 other architects. That is quite interesting. This is some quite good show. But she, as I recall, and don't quote me if I'm wrong, as I recall, they extended the buildings with the balconies, and they could see that you had more people using these kind of areas, but they used it more frequently during day and afternoon, and the curtains was actually to create some kind of home. This kind of increase with the balconies, and the way to do it was instead of turning down the buildings, but extending actually the apartment and modernizing the apartment. So I think the feedback from the residents of her buildings and the company is that it was quite well actually, and the curtains is actually to make some kind of inside, outside, and open and closing, and of course you need sometimes you need privacy but you have a flexible mobile system that can open and closing in your own place. So, but I think we should make the Daylight site, Daylight Symposium. You can see a lot of presentation by quite interesting and famous architects, quite interesting for you. So so I think it's a mix, of course. If you don't have cross ventilation, people will of course try only single ventilation. It might have a challenge with too high temperatures. Yes.
It's of course culturally very different. In the Netherlands, they don't have curtains at all. But
I would say, as I said in the beginning, you need a healthy. You need also darkness at night, and sometimes you need to be exposed. But it's actually good for you to close the curtains and have a dark bedroom, and it should be as dark as possible actually to sleep well. That has an impact on your sleep quality, which also have an impact on your circadian rhythms and so on. Yeah. Thank you.